Hey everyone, Mr. Harvey here. Let's continue our lecture on the French Revolution. Now, in the previous lecture, ladies and gentlemen, we focused on some of the important events happening with the National Assembly. That tennis court oath, ladies and gentlemen, the abolishment of feudalism, we talked about the Women's March, and some really important events. Today we're going to be focusing on the second phase of the revolution, ladies and gentlemen, with the Legislative Assembly. Now, remember, we divide up the French Revolution into 6 phases, okay? We divided up in the National Assembly, the Legislative Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, the Convention, the Directory, the Consulate, and Napoleon's Empire. Okay, and today we're going to be focusing on that second phase, the Legislative Assembly. So let's get into it. So, remember, part of the tennis court oath in the National Assembly, if we kind of go back to our previous lecture, the National Assembly vowed at that tennis court oath to create a new constitution and a new government. And the Legislative Assembly, okay, this Constitution of 1791 fulfills that promise, okay? And the National Assembly with this Constitution of 1791 gives birth to the Legislative Assembly, so our second phase, okay? This is going to establish a constitutional monarchy in France, much like that of England that we have seen, okay? And the Legislative Assembly is going to be a part of this government where the laws are going to originate. They can make war, they can make peace. They're going to have a significant amount of power. Okay, so we see a new government in France. Now, it's really important for us to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the National Assembly and the Legislative Assembly represent really the liberal phase of the French Revolution. And a lot of historians kind of break up the French Revolution into kind of this liberal phase of where we see things relatively calm, and very Enlightenment influence. We're going to see a lot of the Enlightenment. We've seen it already in the National Assembly phase. We're going to see a lot of the Enlightenment in this legislative Assembly phase. But once we get into the Convention, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to see the radical phase. So just be aware that the National Assembly that we talked about and this Legislative Assembly that we're going to be talking about is considered the Enlightenment, the liberal phase of the Revolution. Okay. And you can definitely see it with this Constitution of 1791. We have a constitution, we have a constitutional monarchy, and there's going to be a lot of enlightenment within this Legislative Assembly. Let's continue talking about it, okay? And here's just a picture of Louis XVI accepting this constitution and accepting this new type of government. And he's really forced to, okay? Louis has lost control of the situation. If he's going to have any power within France, he has to accept this new form of government, and he will. All right, but he will make some mistakes, okay? So let's talk about what this new government looks like. The king is going to get a veto, aka and it's a suspensive veto, so he can't outright veto something and just say no to it. His veto is more of preventative, so he can delay the passage of a law for 4 years, but he can't outright delay or just say no to a law proposal. Okay, so he gets a suspensive veto. The king himself cannot pass laws. Okay, his ministers are going to be, responsible for their own actions. And what's important to understand about this, ladies and gentlemen, within this new Legislative Assembly is much like the English Bill of Rights and the constitutional monarchy in England. In the French constitutional monarchy, the king does not have absolute power anymore. Okay, the king cannot do whatever he wants. All right, the king or queen, the monarchy cannot do whatever they want. And so let's understand that there is a check on that power, and that's clearly the Enlightenment right there, ladies and gentlemen, with Montesquieu. Okay, there's clearly a check on the power of the monarchy. Okay, now within this government, ladies and gentlemen, another thing that's really important for us to understand is participation. Who can participate? Who can vote? All right, and so there's going to be a definition on who can vote versus who can't vote. And so in this government, an active citizen, someone who pays taxes amounting to 3 days of labor, can vote versus a passive citizen who does not pay these taxes. They cannot vote. All right, and remember, also, women cannot vote, people of color cannot vote. And so this is important to understand that this, ladies and gentlemen, is not democracy, like I said with the Enlightenment. Okay, there is some Enlightenment influence here, right? That we see a constitution, we're seeing a separation of powers, checks and balances, but this is not outright democracy because, okay, the majority of the population, this is not allowing for more people to participate. Okay, the majority of the population cannot participate. So this is not democracy. Important for us to understand that, okay? and roughly 1/3 of adult males are denied the right to vote, and women and people of color are denied the right to vote. So only a select group can participate, and that's important for us to understand. Okay, and so essentially, what happens with these elections, ladies and gentlemen, is that the voters will decide on who's going to join the legislative assembly, the members of the legislative assembly. So the citizenry will vote for who is going to join this legislative assembly. Okay, all right. And a goal of the legislative assembly is to make sure that this country doesn't just get turned over to the masses, become ruled by a mob. We're going to see that a little bit later on with the Sans-Culottes and the Jacobins when France just loses control of the situation. We will see kind of a mob rule mentality later on during the radical phase, during the convention, and some of the other phases. Okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about this new government, and let's talk about some of the changes that we're going to be seeing. This legislative assembly has a lot to do, and it's going to immediately go in and make some significant changes to France. One of the things that's going to abolish the ancient provinces of France and reorganize it, okay? And it's going to reorganize it into these units called départements, governed by elected officials, and I'll show you a picture of that. It's going to get rid of their old court system, the parlements, and replace it with a more uniform court system throughout France, okay, with the elected judges and elected prosecutors, okay, lawyers. All right, and this is kind of the change that we see. You have these old provinces right here, Normandy, okay, Alsace and Lorraine, all right, Brittany, and we're going to see the departments. Much more organized, much more uniform, okay? We're also going to see, ladies and gentlemen, some significant economic reform during the Revolution. Okay, and this is the National Assembly was important in this as well. Okay, but before the Legislative Assembly came about, and a lot of these reforms are going to favor the middle class, which makes sense because the third estate, which is going to become the National Assembly, okay, and really be the key to the National Assembly. Well, the people in the third estate who have a lot of influence and power were wealthy upper middle class. And so a lot of the economic reforms are going to benefit them. All right. So what do? Well, one thing they do is they adopt the metric system. And we're going to see the La Chapelière law outlaw strikes, workers' coalitions, and assemblies. That's really significant. Let's highlight that in our notes, ladies and gentlemen, and circle that. That's really significant because, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing the middle class make it harder for workers to organize and fight for their own rights. And that's going to be important for us to understand, especially when we get into the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so what's important for us is that we're seeing that the middle class, the upper middle class, create economic laws to benefit them. Okay, they're going to abolish internal tariffs, ladies and gentlemen, which is really important because we're going to start to see some capitalism, and we're going to see a new currency in France, the assignats. Okay, now this civil constitution of the clergy, I really want you all to pay attention to. This is important because, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be one of the first major mistakes of the revolutionaries. Okay, and this is kind of National Assembly, Legislative Assembly. All right, so this is a major mistake by the revolutionaries. Okay, and we're going to talk about this oath of allegiance in the next slide. So the civil constitution of the clergy, and I want to make sure people highlight this, circle it, star it, and just say big mistake by the revolutionaries. Okay, this is a huge mistake. All right. Well, the National Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, and remember, part of the reason of why the French Revolution started was debt, financial problems. Well, one of the ways the National Assembly is going to try to solve this debt is they're going to start selling off church lands. Catholics in France and the clergy going to be happy about that? All right, and you can kind of see where I'm going to be going here. All right, we're going to see the National Assembly really split. Support for the revolution with Catholics. Many Catholics are going to be upset with them. Okay? And we're going to see a religious reconstruction in France based on this civil constitution of the clergy. It's going to secularize religion in France, and we're going to see more state control over religion. All right? We're going to see a new national church be created with 83 bishops and dioceses. And we're going to see all clergy be paid by the state and elected by the citizens, okay? Covenants and monasteries are abolished, but here's the big one that I want you all to highlight that's really important. is that the clergy are going to be forced to take an oath of loyalty to the new government, ladies and gentlemen. An oath of loyalty to the new government. That is really going to upset them. And this is going to deeply divide France and the people of France, especially the clergy, over the issue of religion. Okay, and so we are going to see, ladies and gentlemen, this is important. Some Catholics and the clergy start to become enemies of the revolution, and the revolutionaries. And this is a time when the revolutionaries need as much support as they can get. They're fighting against the establishment, nobles. They're fighting against the monarchy, and now they're making an enemy of Catholics and the clergy. This is a big problem. Okay, this is really going to hurt relations between the state and Catholics, and a lot of the priests will just outright refuse to accept this constitution. So what's important about this, ladies and gentlemen, is we have seen the revolutionaries are making enemies of the clergy and Catholics. And you'll see some parts of the population not like this as well. Okay? Some of the most devout Catholics in France, and remember, France is deeply Catholic, will not like this. Okay? Very, very, very divisive action by the National Assembly. Okay? Now, we're going to see at this time, ladies and gentlemen, and the National Assembly has just made an enemy of some Catholics and the clergy. Well, we're going to see some of the enemies to the revolutionary, to the revolution, start to try to fight back against the revolutionaries and we're going to talk about counter-revolutionary activity. Let's talk about the émigrés. Okay, these are French aristocrats who fled France during the revolution. These émigrés, and they're going to settle in countries near the French border. Okay, Netherlands, Austria, HRE. Some of the Germanic lands, and they had a goal of rallying support for the monarch, for Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, with the goal of eventually pushing back against the revolution and taking out the revolution. Okay, and so we're gonna be talking more about these émigrés a little bit later. But here's a huge mistake that we're gonna see, and this is gonna be vital to the revolution, ladies and gentlemen, is we are going to see Louis try to run away. And this is a huge deal, ladies and gentlemen, okay? And let's talk about that. So let me give you a little bit of background on him and the Bourbon monarchy trying to run away. So it's about June of 1791, okay? And we are going to see, ladies and gentlemen, Louis and the family head north towards the Luxembourg border. And we're going to see the king is going to be recognized on his way while the family is traveling north, okay? And this is going to really irritate the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries are going to be like, where were you going? What are you doing? What are you up to? We thought you were on our side. You're part of this constitutional monarchy and still have a significant amount of power. Really? What's going on here? And this is really going to facilitate a lot of distrust between the revolutionaries and the monarchy, and also it's going to be incredibly divisive within the revolution, because you're going to see more radical groups like the Jacobins who want a republic say, we don't need a king, let's just kill him. And so this is going to start illustrating the spiral, France spiraling out of control with this revolution, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, another important event that kind of illustrates this pushback against the revolution is the Declaration of Pillnitz. Okay, and this is in 1791. Emperor Leopold, okay, and he is the brother of Marie Antoinette. Okay, this is Leopold, ladies and gentlemen, if you remember, Maria Theresa's son. Okay, he's going to issue a statement, okay, a declaration with the Prussian king, King Frederick William II, and these two monarchs are going to threaten the revolutionaries. They are promising to intervene in France to protect the royal family and preserve the monarchy if other European powers agreed. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, is they are issuing kind of a threat to the revolutionaries that don't let anything happen to the monarchs. Okay, and this is aimed at saying, hey, revolutionaries, we are going to protect the royal family from you if we need to. And the revolutionaries will be like, all right, bring it on. Okay. Now England's not going to give consent to this. England is busy with the Industrial Revolution, making money, consolidating their power abroad. England's going to be like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Oh. And they're just going to be they're really not going to put too much into this until it's a little bit too late, until Napoleon. And then England's going to be like, oh no, we got to get ourselves involved in this. Okay, when Napoleon shows up, England and the revolutionary gets a little bit crazier, England's going to start to be getting involved. Okay, but the French revolutionaries took this as a threat, and you can start. We're going to start to see the situation blow up. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the reaction to the French Revolution on an international scale. We have a thinker named Edmund Burke, okay, and he's going to write the Reflection on the Revolution in France in 1790, okay? This was a conservative, let's highlight that, criticism of the French Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, and he's going to condemn the revolution and the reconstruction of France based on rationalism. And he's going to forecast and actually predict a lot of the turmoil of France, as, you know, we're going to start seeing people without experience run the government. And he's also going to predict that the king and queen will be executed and that the revolution will end up in a military dictatorship, which we will see with Napoleon. He's going to predict a lot of what's going on. And he was coming from a conservative point of view, saying, we're just going to see mob rule, and we're going to see France just lose control of the situation. And he's right. Edmund Burke is completely right that France is going to lose control of the situation. Okay? And here's just a little bit of his text, the Reflections on the Revolution in France. Okay, we're going to see Thomas Paine respond to Burke, and he's, if you're not familiar with Thomas Paine, he was very involved within the American Revolution, and he's actually going to defend the French Revolution, which makes sense because Thomas Paine, an intellectual thinker within the American Revolution. Well, the American Revolution embodied the Enlightenment. The French Revolution embodied the Enlightenment. The French Revolution inspired by the American Revolution. The lot of the revolutionary principles that we saw in the American Revolution are, you know, being put forth in the French Revolution. So Thomas Paine is going to support this revolution until it gets a little too out of control. Now, really important to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the United States is a country directly connected to the French Revolution because the United States, you know, kind of revolted in the same kind of manner with the Enlightenment principles. But the United States is not going to be able to really intervene and become entangled in this mess in Europe that we're going to see with the French Revolution because the United States is a small country right now. It is not very powerful. But what's important that I want you all to understand is we're going to slowly start to see the United States, ladies and gentlemen, throughout the rest of this course, become more and more and more intertwined with European affairs. We're going to see that in the 1800s with imperialism, and then we're going to see that obviously with our world wars of World War I and World War II. But the United States right now is not going to get super involved in this because they're not quite powerful enough, and they're not quite big enough yet to really make an important and be really helpful. Okay, but a lot of other European powers, ladies and gentlemen, saw the revolution in France as a threat, big time, and a lot of other European powers are going to be quite worried about what's going on in France with this. Okay, Austria, Prussia are going to be very worried about this, and like I said before, Great Britain is going to be looking at this, and you know, Great Britain's going to be really focused on themselves during this time. They will be getting involved during the French Revolution, especially during Napoleon. But Great Britain is focused on their economics during this time. Okay, some countries are going to turn to repressive policies to forestall revolutionary activity at home. And Great Britain will do that. They will be like, we're not going to have our own revolution, and we're going to see, William Pitt, writes that certain ideas are treasonable. They're going to suspend habeas corpus. And we're going to see some countries, try to make sure that the revolution doesn't spread to their countries as well. Okay. So let's continue, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the Legislative Assembly. So the National Assembly is going to draw to a close. Okay. And we see that that Legislative Assembly completely take over with that Constitution of 1791. Now, something really important, ladies and gentlemen, that we're going to see is the National Assembly is going to agree that no one within the National Assembly is going to be able to take part in the new assembly. So they're going to bring a whole new different group of politicians to the Legislative Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, okay? But, this government, ladies and gentlemen, this National Assembly was pretty much doomed to fail because of all the numerous challenges that it's being kind of thrown at. It's the Catholic resistance to the civil constitution of the clergy is going to be really hard on the Legislative Assembly. It's going to really divide support for the Legislative Assembly. The king running away is going to really divide support for the Legislative Assembly because people are going to be arguing, why should we trust a king and have a king in power who has this veto in part of this constitutional monarchy if the king is trying to run away and kill us. And we're going to see that argument made by the Jacobins and the Republicans. And the Declaration of Pillnitz, right? The fact that the revolutionaries might have to fight not just their own revolution at home internally, but they might have to get involved in some wars abroad with, the Austrians and the Prussians. So this legislative assembly is not going to work, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be really doomed to fail, and we're going to see that things are quickly going to start spiraling out of control for the French Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, which we will talk about in the next lecture when we start the radical phase of the French Revolution, when things get pretty out of hand during the Revolution. Okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and for the next lecture, we will start talking about this radical phase. Have a good one. Thank you.